So the next strategy is just going to be segmenting your audience. So we now know that we have our goals, we have our database, and it's a clean database. Hopefully you guys are using FreshDress. And so we have this database, it's clean, we know if they're engaging or not. So now let's look at these subgroups within it. So with that, we have our second poll. So how did your year-end programs perform? Did they exceed expectations, meet expectations, or did you miss your expectations? Okay, so hopefully you guys have answered there. A lot of the times when we're working with clients, hopefully everybody's at least met their expectations, a couple have exceeded, but those that have performed worse than expected, a lot of the times it's a great opportunity to go back to the drawing board and really see what happened and see the ways that you can improve for the next year. So if we can move on. Just next quote here. So people shop and learn in a whole new way compared to just a few years ago. And I think that nowhere else is that true more than in the digital realm. If you go back 5, 10 years ago, most people were still going to the brick and mortar stores. They weren't expecting a one-to-one relationship with brands, and that is a completely different experience than what brands are providing for them today. So with that, a lot of that comes down to segmenting, personalizing, and customizing those experiences. So just some terms to set us up for the rest of this section. First, we have personalization. So personalization is really just making sure that you're talking to that individual. So it's stuff using their name, using their location, personalizing that message to that individual. Now, it is important to note that if the person hasn't given you that permission to use that information, then don't do it. But using personalization in emails is a great way to improve that relationship. Next is segmentation. So we've talked about, we have this database, they come from all different ways. We talked about new customers, we talked about leads, we talked about inactive group. Segmenting to these different populations is really important. So make sure that you're sending these messages to a specific portion of the list that it applies to. And last is customization. Customization is the ability to take one product or service and modifying it so it suits that individual. So instead of just sending out one example of like a car, if you know the person likes red cars and they like trucks, for example, then you're sending out a red truck message, where you're really tailoring that message. We sell cars to that person. We sell red trucks. So moving on, these three levels of segmentation really come in order. First, you have to collect the data. If your data set isn't clean and it isn't up to date, then starting to use these personalization tactics and these segmentation tactics is going to be a stretch. They're not going to be as effective. So first, you have to collect that data and make sure that it's clean. From there, you move on to segmenting. So you start looking at subgroups within your data set. And then lastly, you tailor those messages to those individuals using that personalization. So with that, when and where do you use this? Because not every single message needs to be personalized and segmented and go through all of these different steps. For example, if you have a big sale or something that's going to apply across the board, that's a message that can go to everybody. You don't really have to think through the segmentation there, other than maybe taking out people that aren't interested or aren't engaging with your emails to begin with. But that's a message that is pretty much just lump everybody together and hit send. So this crate and barrel example here is one of those examples where this message, and this was during the holiday season, it'll work for everybody. But other messages can be much more specific, even if you think maybe this could apply or it could be on the fringes. For example, this Disney email on the right is a great email, but if you're sending this to maybe a single dad with a son, then it might not be as applicable, since most of the products there are female-driven products. So you could send it maybe every once in a while, but you don't want to send somebody that's not going to apply to over and over and over again. So where do you start? Well, first, instead of going out there and thinking through all the different ways that we can segment and ask people and think of all these complex ways, start with what you have. So a lot of times you could just look at your database and say, okay, what do we have? Do we have their gender? Do we have their age? Do we have their geography, product interest, product history? I mean, the list goes on. You should have at least some understanding of the individual, and that could be as simple as what's the last thing that they clicked on in an email. Just find out what you have and start your program there. So for example, Patagonia here, that jacket, you could do male or female. That purchase history, if they've purchased movies where it was superheroes in the past or action films, then you can definitely send to that segment because you know what they've engaged with in the past. Just start basic and then work your way from there. So why is all this important? Because in the e-commerce world, a lot of revenue is being generated by a small subset of your customers. So according to Adobe here, 40% of e-commerce revenue is generated by only 8% of repeat customers, and catering your messaging to make your brand one of somebody's preferred brand is really going to come down to improving that relationship. You want to talk to them, you want to be relevant to them, you want them to think about you every time you hit the send button, and using segmentation and personalization is a great way to achieve that. So with that, it sounds really complicated, but really all you need to do is just take it real simple. When you're creating a message, just ask yourself, does this work for everybody? Is there any groups within our database that this might not work with? So for example, this K Jewelers message, I am sure that their engagement rings are something that draw a lot of engagement and draw a lot of interest in people. But if somebody's a newlywed, for example, and you know that they're not purchasing within that first year likely, then sending them an engagement ring message likely isn't going to work for them. So just ask yourself that before you're hitting send. And then use testing and analytics to determine how different segments are engaging and which segment should be a priority. Within your database, I am sure that you guys have customers that have a much higher ROI than others. Make sure that you're catering your message to those that are really going to drive your sales, where others you could send to on a less frequently. So with that, just another idea for segmenting lapsed customers is you can look at recency or frequency. So for customers, for brands that don't have a ton of history or a ton of information about the customer, one easy place to start is just that recency of their last order. So has it been a really long time? What was their purchase history like when they were purchasing from you? Just breaking down that, and it gives you a real clear direction on prioritizing a segment. So those that are recent customers who ordered frequently would obviously be much more of a priority than those that haven't ordered in a long time and only ordered once. So just to get your mind working, that's a great way to kind of picture how to prioritize one group over the next. And with that, make sure that you're planning. So once again, this is kind of that foundational message, but make sure you're using a content calendar to assess who's being sent what, and make sure that each of your subgroups, so we've broken our list down, make sure each of those is at least getting one message a month, and those that are being sent to frequently, you're not going to be burning them out. And so that might take time to figure out what exactly that cadence is, but make sure at least everybody's getting something and nobody's getting so much that they're going to unsubscribe.